Welcome, everybody. Very excited to talk to you today about Grackle for Google Sheets, making your data accessible. So this is a crucial part of our broader university web strategy, and it's all about ensuring that the data we create and share is usable by every member of our community. Before we get started, here's some housekeeping things to keep in mind. First of all, please, if you haven't already, mute your microphones. This will help limit background noise as we go through today. We are recording this session. I will make it available on the Boise State Accessibility site on the on-demand webinars page. If you do have questions, we will try our best to answer them at the end of the session. I've tried to leave some time at the end, but if we run out of time, we will still answer your questions and include them on that page with the webinar recording. So if you have questions, please add them to chat. And my wonderful assistant, Sierra Garachana, will collect all those and we will answer those at the end. If you have any questions or need assistance, you can also directly message her. We also have a resource available on the Boise State Accessibility website specific for Grackle Sheets. So if you go to Boise State Accessibility on the resources and tutorials page, you will find all of these resources and more. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So my name is Carolyn Quintero, and I am the manager of web accessibility on the University Web Strategy team. I've helped guide the institution's digital compliance and inclusion efforts specifically for our public-facing web content since 2017. My educational background includes a Master of Arts in Technical Communication and a Bachelor of Arts in Communications, both earned at Boise State University. And my approach to accessibility is not just compliance. I think of accessibility as a critical element ensuring every step in the content process works for everyone. So it has to work for our content creators as well as our end users. So trying to find those solutions that it works for everyone is really what keeps me going in my job. I absolutely love it. But I'm not the only resource available on campus to help with this huge topic that we're talking about. We do have additional support available for campus in our Office of Compliance and Ethics. Christine Dobson is our new Digital Accessibility Compliance Officer. And if you have questions about the new accessibility requirements or would like to schedule a time for the compliance staff to explain regulations and provide basic accessibility training, you can contact their office at accessibility@boisestate.edu or 208-426-1256. And again, they can answer compliance questions, they can do software testing, and answer general accessibility questions. For questions or to set up a consultation about support and resources available for making course materials, so this is for faculty support, for making course materials accessible, including requesting a course review, you can contact Jeremy Harper in Community Engagement and Belonging. And that email is belonging@boisestate.edu, and the phone number is 208-426-6156. Again, that's for faculty consultations and support to discuss accessible course materials or to request a course review. So lots of resources available on campus to help you with these questions as we get going. So our commitment to accessibility is rooted in legal compliance, specifically Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. The new digital accessibility guidelines were published on April 24th of 2024, and they apply directly to us as a public institution. These guidelines require that all of our digital content, including websites, apps, digital documents, presentations, and course materials, must be accessible. This even covers content stored in password protected systems like My Boise State, Canvas, or specifically Google Drive, which is what we're talking about today. The deadline for meeting the WCAG 2.1 level AA standards is April 24th of 2026. So this is also the compliance standard that we require on boisestate.edu. So a lot of our web content is already at this level, but where we have missed some of this compliance is those password protected system files like our Google Sheets. And while compliance is the floor, our goal is really to shift focus beyond it. So this is to move from accommodating to anticipating. The current accommodating model is much more reactive. A user has to report a barrier and request access. That can lead to time delays, frustration, and lost engagement. And in the worst case scenario, the barrier is never fixed. But the anticipating model is proactive, and that is when we empower ourselves to build for accessibility from the start. This leads to fewer delays, less mental effort for the user, and a higher likelihood of engagement. Accessible design helps everyone, whether they're using a screen reader or just browsing on a mobile device, and we want to remove those barriers before they ever even become an issue. Okay, so how do we start? Our goal for this month is to review our Google Sheets and make a decision for each one. So those decisions are we going to remove this content? Are we going to replace it with something more accessible, like another format? Or are we going to remediate it? So let's go through the questions we need to ask ourselves for each file. Here's the decision framework. Think of your files as going into one of these three buckets. If your content needs to go into the remove bucket, here's some questions you can ask. Do we still need this sheet? Is the information current? Is the information accurate? If it's not being used anymore, if it is old content, if it is really not there for a purpose that is serving your department needs, the best course of action is going to be remove it from the website. Replace. It may be that your content is okay, it's accurate, it's current, but maybe it's not in the best format for your audience. So ask yourself, is this the best format for this content? Could you move it to another format like a web page or maybe even a web form? Something that is going to be more accessible for the user to interact with that content and engage with it. So this is where you're going to replace it with another format. And finally, remediate. So this is the question, your users require the version of this sheet. They need to use it to do something. Maybe it's a template for people to copy. Maybe it is something that they require to do their job, and it has to be in this format. It's absolutely okay to keep the sheet. This is where we need to go through and make it accessible so that it's available for all users. And one of the tools that's available to do that is Grackle Sheets. So again, to reiterate, if you're removing your content, remove the link, unshare the sheet, and then archive as needed for your department. If that is removing it and deleting it, go for it. Or you may need to kind of archive it and have a special folder in Google File or in Google Drive that allows you to archive that content. If you are replacing the content, convert that content to the other format. So get it into the web page, get it into the web form, get it into whatever format it needs to be, and then remove that web link and archive as needed based on your department needs. And finally, if your content falls into that remediate bucket, I highly recommend you make a copy of your content and then make your remediation fixes. So make a copy, run Grackle Sheets, fix your issues, and then share that accessible version with your audience. And the reason for that is you may have to do some pretty significant edits to that content to make it accessible. And you don't want to be doing that live as people are accessing that content. So make a copy, make your fixes, publish the accessible version, and then you can remove and archive that old version as needed. So that brings us to the main part of today. We are going to learn how to use Grackle Sheets to fix and remediate content in our Google Sheets. And Grackle Sheets is an accessibility checker for Google Sheets. Google Sheets does not have a native accessibility checker. So Grackle Sheets is a third-party add-on that the university subscribes to that is available within every single Google Sheet. And it is incredibly easy to access. So let me find my mouse here. There we go. To access Grackle Sheets, you open your sheet, go to Extensions, Grackle Sheets, and then Launch. That is all you have to do. And then it will launch a report on the right-hand side of your screen. When you get the report, it is broken into 5 categories: sheets, tables, images, charts, and contents. Sheets provides information on the overall structure and the metadata of your file. It also ensures that you have a proper title, descriptive sheet names, and a reasonable number of sheets in your workbook. The tables section is really where you're probably going to spend the most time making fixes. It ensures that your data is organized and tagged correctly so that screen readers can use it. It will give you the tool to tag your tables with headers and remind you to avoid things like merged cells. Your images and charts section are all about your data visualizations. Images is about the visual content and will let you know, hey, this image needs a descriptive alternative text, or it will let you mark it as a decorative artifact. And the charts does the same thing, but for the data visualization. So it will require or remind you to add alternative text to your charts and graphics to summarize that information. And then finally, the content section covers things like readability and visual design. So this is checking for things like high color contrast or difficult to read fine print. One of the recommended workflows for working with Grackle Sheets is to actually work backwards. So instead of starting at the beginning of the report with sheets and working down to contents, it's actually better to work backwards from that more granular view, the things available in the content section, and then fix your charts and images, then spend your time on your tables and finally on your sheets. And this will allow you to go from, the very specific instances of issues up to the broader issues. The very first thing in the report is review fine print. So in this, the content section, if you scroll to the end of the report, fine print should be avoided. If you select that option, it will tell you which cell on the sheet has fine print. It will highlight it, and then you can go to that cell and fix it. This is flagged when anything is below 8-point font. So you want to try to aim for 10 or higher. 8 is kind of the smallest that it can possibly be. Changing that font to something larger like 10-point will fix the issue. And then you can recheck the report and it should clear the issue. When we're talking about fine print, it's generally best to avoid small print. So set your text size ideally to 12 point or higher. I believe the default in Google Sheets is 10. That's perfectly fine. If you want to change it to a larger font like 12 point, you can do that as well. Some of the things you can do to avoid that fine print, that need for that small print, is to simplify your wording. Sometimes we shrink the size in order to make it fit within a certain amount of space, but sometimes changing that wording and simplifying it will allow you to say the same thing with less words. You could also use bullet points to break it up. So that way you're not having to force, everything into one cell. You can maybe use bullet points to make that content a little easier to read. You can also do things like widen your columns or use the text wrapping tool to make sure your content fits nicely within the cell that you want it to. If you have more complex content, here are some alternative formatting tips. Consider moving notes to their own sheet. If you have a very lengthy note that is required for some of your data, you could put that on a notes sheet, and then you have access to more formatting options, you have more space, and you might not be forced to kind of give it that small point to fit the small font format to make it fit within a certain space. So consider moving notes to their own sheet to allow for more space and more room. You can also use descriptive cell notes for specific data points. So this is a function within Google Sheets that allows you to add notes to specific cells. So this is how you can get that same content in a little bit different format for users. You can also consider adding a background color for high contrast. So that gives visual weight to the information without having to make it really small font. You could also change the font weight, so a regular light or black weight for your font. So those are all ways to kind of format your notes without relying on text size, that small text size. And the main thing to keep in mind for any of your notes is to make them legible, distinguishable, and easy to locate. The next check on your report is color contrast. So this check will look for any text that is not using a high contrast color. To access this information, click on high color contrast should be used, select the cell sheet, and it will take you to the cell that it's available. One tool that's available to check the color contrast is this color contrast checker. And I have the link available in the slides, and I will share that with you. So if you do not know which text color to use, and you don't know which would be an accessible color, you can copy the hex code from the Google Sheets color tools and pop it into a tool like this color contrast analyzer. It will let you see the background color, the foreground color, and it will show you the contrast ratios. So you can select white. The hex code for white is FFFFFF. And then you can plug in the color here, and it fails on all accounts. You can also check it against black. The hex code for black is 6 zeros, so 000000. And just changing the background color, if you need to keep this light pink color, for example, just changing the background color from white to black allows it to pass all of the requirements. So it passes at the WCAG AA, large text, AAA large text, AA normal, and AAA normal. So then an easy fix would be to just change the background color of the content in your spreadsheet. And you can do that using the tools available in Google Sheets. So this would be selecting the background color and changing it to black. And that will fix the error in Grackle Sheets. But you'll notice that on the report, there's only one cell that is highlighted as failing the contrast, but there's more color in our spreadsheet. So anytime you have color in your spreadsheet, you need to manually check the color contrast. So this, we have a very light green color, and these are being used with conditional formatting. And Grackle Sheets may not pull in the conditional formatting colors. So we can use that color contrast checker, again, to check, is this an accessible color contrast? And if we look at it on white, it fails all accounts. So this is not an accessible contrast. But if we want to keep that light green color, one of the options includes changing the background color. So we could make the background the green with black text. We could also make it a black text with that light green. And then the same with the pink color. We can verify that that color contrast is going to work. And sometimes just changing the background color makes it the accessible contrast. So anytime you have color in your sheet, always do a manual review because Grackle Sheets can only check so many pieces. Tips for color contrast. The main thing to do is avoid light text on light backgrounds and avoid dark text on dark backgrounds. If you want to find the exact color contrast ratio for the WCAG compliance, you'll have to use a color contrast tool like the one I shared in this presentation. But general tip to keep in mind, light on light is bad, dark on dark is bad. Kind of keep those ratios. So black and white, blue, dark blue and white, white and dark gray, for example. You want to keep those kind of consistent. And then always use high contrast conditional formatting because Grackle Sheets will not check the conditional formatting rules. So another tip is to not use color alone. Not everyone can interpret color the same way. And so if you are using color to indicate a value or a change or something, you have to provide something else. In our spreadsheet, we showed that our conditional formatting for green was a positive number. Our conditional formatting for the pink color was a negative number. So we also added that plus and minus signal to it. If we had just had the green and the red or the light pink, that would not have been enough. So you need to provide some other explanation for what the color means. When you are doing color tests, you can also check all your colors against a white or a black background. That will give you kind of the highest contrast ratio. And the web page for the link that I shared is colorcontrast.cc. So that's COLOUR contrast.cc. So it's got that U in there for color. And I will share that resource as well. So once you've taken care of the fine print and the color, the next thing you'll want to tackle is any alt text, any visuals or data chart requirements. So in this example spreadsheet, we have a chart. This chart requires an alternative text description, and you can add alternative text by either selecting the chart options and then adding an alternative text to the chart. And a good alternative text is to provide a good summary of what is in the chart and what are the main takeaways. You can also use the edit button within the Grackle Sheets check to add alternative text to the button or to the chart. Another thing you can do is edit your chart using the chart editor tool. So this allows you to really add some additional really good accessibility features to your chart that Grackle Docs will, or Grackle Sheets does not check for. So for example, adding column labels to your chart. You can adjust the colors in your chart. You can add chart titles to your chart. You can add horizontal and vertical, or horizontal, and I forget what the other one is, labels to your accesses. You can adjust the font or the font weight or the colors. These are all ways that you can add accessibility and labels to your chart in a very effective way. So horizontal and vertical axis titles, for example. So adding region for the horizontal axis title, adding dollars for the vertical axis title or title. I cannot talk today. Those are all ways to add really good labels to your chart so that it's easy for everyone to understand the relationships. You can also add series labels or change the font weight around them to add some texture to your colors as well. So for example, for the Q1, you can change the outline to be a dotted line. So again, that adds another element besides just color to your content. And adding data labels is also incredibly important. And when you add those data labels, you also want to check the color values to make sure that the color ratio between the data label and the chart color is also accessible. So you can really fine tune your charts to make them incredibly accessible for people who are going to be reviewing it. And again, you can check the color contrast of your data labels and make sure that those are correct and good for everyone. And this one passes for everything except for AAA. And then you can do the same thing for your horizontal axis, your vertical axis, and then you can also add grid lines and major grid lines, major ticks, minor ticks to your charts. So if you have charts that you are editing in your Google Sheets, check out this chart editor tool because it provides a lot of really good resources for you to edit your chart. And then after you've done that, just make sure you have alternative text. Okay, so that is charts. In this particular one, we do not have images, but images also require alternative text. So tips for alternative text for charts. State the chart type and purpose, and then summarize your key takeaways. And you can also direct the user to the data. So if you have the chart, if the chart is being pulled from a specific table, you can provide that information for the user. So full data available in sales, quarterly sales 23 table, something to that effect. So that way, if users want to use the data table to navigate the data points, they can, or they can see the visual in the chart. For images, you just want to be concise but descriptive and convey the context and function. So this is not describing what it is, but why is it there and why do people need to know about this image? But most importantly, if the image is really there as a decorative purpose, on Grackle Sheets, you'll have the option to mark as an artifact. And if you mark as an artifact, that tells screen readers to skip this image. So that is really important if it's really there just for visual, like think of it as this is the eye candy. This is just here to make it aesthetically pleasing. There is no information being shared in this image at all. Mark it as an artifact. And you have that availability in the Grackle Sheets tool. If it is conveying information and is important for the user to understand the content, you must provide an alternative text description. Okay, so now we come to probably the largest section of the report that you're going to spend the most time on, and that is tables. The very first item on the tables report is tables should have headers. And this will get flagged every single time you have a table in your report. So in this example, Grackle Sheets is telling us that we have 6 tables that need to be marked. And it does give us an option to mark with a header row, with a column, or with a header row, with a header column, or with both header types. But because we have some merged cells within this, our table is starting at quarterly sales, and we don't really want that. Our table really should be region, quarter 1, quarter 2, and change, and our regions. Quarterly sales is kind of what we're showing as the table name. So what we want to do is we want to make sure our tables are actually selected and converted to a table. And this is a fairly new feature available in Google Sheets. So you can select your table and format, convert to table, or the keyboard shortcut Control-Alt-T. That will insert a table for your content. And you can also right-click and select Convert to Table. And you can repeat this as many times as needed for your table content. And the nice thing is, and again, this is a fairly new feature, when you rerun your Grackle Sheets report, it should pull those tables out of the red check mark to green passed. Yep, there we go. 2 tables have been marked. And it starts with region. And then you can repeat that function for any table that is on your sheet. So that convert to table feature is going to be really nice for you guys to get your content into a table format that is going to be more accessible for your users. And on this particular sheet, there's a handful of small tables, and so we can convert them to tables. And then we have one with a blank line in the middle, so we can delete that line and shift our cells up and then turn the whole thing into a table. And sometimes Google Sheets will give you that option as well if you have that table formatted. And then you can recheck your Grackle Sheet and verify that all your tables are correct. Another thing you can do is if you want to make sure that your table has both a header row and a column row, you may need to unmark the tables by selecting that unmark button and then remarking them with the correct option. So in this case, we want to have both header types, the header row and a header column. So we can select mark with both header types and then select mark again, and then that will update our tables to show that they have both a header row and a header column. And this is helpful because it provides 2 data points for people to help navigate that table. And that takes care of most of our tables. The nice thing with this option is it gives you a lot of customization. So you can very quickly change the table colors. You can add a custom color. So if we want to add our Boise State blue, we can go grab our hex code for our Boise State blue. And we've got very nice, easy to read table colors. We can also change the table formatting to show grid lines, to alternate colors, to what are some of the other options? A condensed view, add a table footer, or a view advanced options. So using that convert to table feature also gives you a lot of really good formatting options to add a lot of visual appeal to your tables so that they are easier for visual users to navigate as well. Okay, so that is the check for tables should have headers. Another check that is in the table section is tables should not be too long. And in this particular one, we have one table that is flagged as too large. And this one has multiple rows. So this has a name and a region that the person is in charge of. So one thing we can do is break up our content into smaller chunks. So if we wanted to break it up by name, there's no real clear pattern for how this information is being used. But we could break it up by region. So let's sort our table again by region. Sort, advanced sorting. Our data has a table, a header row, and then we are going to sort by region. So now we can break these up by regions, and you can do this however makes sense for you. For this one, I'm just going to break it up into kind of two halves. So I can take my content and break it into two individual tables. So I have name and region. And I'm going to break it up at, let's say, Louisiana. So everything from Maine to Wyoming, I want to cut and paste onto a new sheet. So I'm going to select all my data and I'm going to cut and go to a new sheet. And this sheet too is here, but it's empty. So I'm going to type name and region for my header content, and then I'm going to paste my content in. Then I can convert to table, and then I've got a table on that sheet. And then I can do the same thing with this one. So now that I have a little bit shorter amount of content, I'm going to highlight this content, and I'm going to convert to table. So now when I hit recheck, my table should not be too long, error should be cleared, and my other two tables should appear on the page as well, on the report as well. And there we go. It actually says I need to mark one of my tables. So I can choose how to mark that. That is the table on sheet 2. So I can choose mark it with both header types and select mark. So anytime you're making changes to tables, hit that recheck button frequently, because it could be that as you are adding content, as you are adjusting content, you may need to mark those table header cells as you go. Another check available in the table section is checking for isolated or merged cells. So in this report, there are 5 instances of merged cells, and it looks like those are all those quarterly sales summaries, kind of table headers that we have. And this really should be the table name. So what we can do is we can name our tables quarterly sales summary and then the year. So quarterly sales summary 21. Let me fix that there. Quarterly sales summary 21. Quarterly sales summary 22. I can cut that from there and paste it into the table name. And then the same thing for table 2. So that gives it a descriptive name. It's not just table 2, it is quarterly sales summary and then the year. And one thing I learned is there's very specific rules for how you can name a table. So if you do get that error, you may need to change it a little bit because it putting numbers in a specific way or putting hyphens or things like that, because you can pull table names into formulas, it needs to be written in a way that will work with formulas, which is what I found out when I was testing all of this. So if you get that error, just adjust your table name slightly. And then you can delete those areas or those table names above and recheck, and your merged cells should change slightly. There's a lot of waiting with Grackle Sheets and the recheck feature, so be patient. So now there's no text associated with our merged cells, so we can just use this unmerge tool and unmerge them all at once. The other option you have is selecting the cell range that is merged and then using the unmerge tool in Google Sheets. But this allows you to unmerge them all in one go, which is really nice. So now we don't have any merged cells in our tables. And if you have isolated cells, so this is where you might have a cell that isn't close to a table, it isn't associated with the table in any way, you need to incorporate it into that table in some way, or move it so it's not off on its own, because if it's off on its own, it's difficult to find. So general tips for tables: keep them simple. Avoid complex layouts at all costs. Do not merge or isolate your cells, because that makes it more confusing to navigate for a non-visual user. And always make sure you have a single clear row of header cells at the beginning of your table. If you have complex tables, try to break them into smaller tables. And you could do this either by breaking them into smaller tables on a single sheet, or break them into multiple sheets, because that allows you to, again, use more formatting options, label that sheet name so it's descriptive. It also allows you to use a simpler format because you're not trying to get too many things into one sheet. So those are the main takeaways for tables. And then finally, the very final check you should do is make sure everything has a name. And this is where your Sheets check comes into play. So the things that it's checking on the Sheets checks is you should not have sheets that are empty. If you have a sheet that is empty, you can remove the sheet or add content to it. If you have sheets that are too large, so we had that one table that was flagged as too large. Taking care of that table is too large error also took care of our sheets that are too large error. If you have multiple sheets in your workbook, we're talking like 30, 40, 50 sheets, that may flag the number of sheets should be reasonable. And so the fix for that would be to break it into entirely new sheets. So have one file that has a specific set of sheets, and then a second file that has a specific set of sheets. That is how you can take care of those two issues. I could not find specific information on when that check gets flagged, but if you have a crazy number of sheets on your Google Sheets, that one may get flagged. And so that's just one thing to keep in mind. I have yet to encounter one that flags this error. But the one that you'll probably always get is sheet name should be descriptive, because by default, your sheet name is not descriptive and we don't always remember to change it. So your sheet name is the sheet 1, sheet 2, sheet 3. That doesn't really tell us anything. Give your sheet name a descriptive name. So this one we're going to call quarterly sales and sales by state, because those are the two types of tables that are available on this sheet. For this sheet, I'm going to name it contact info, and then the state range. So this is Maine through Wyoming. And then on sheet 3, that is where we had everything from Alabama to Louisiana, I believe it was. So contact info, Alabama through Louisiana. And then you can rearrange your sheets so that they're in a logical order as well. Alabama comes before Maine, so I can just drag that sheet to where I need it to be. And then if I recheck my report, those sheets are now going to have descriptive names. The final thing you should always check is that your document has a proper title. So this one, and this again is why you need to have manual review of your content instead of just relying on the Grackle Sheets report. Grackle Sheets is saying that the document does have a proper title, but the proper title is pretty generic. It says copy of Untitled 1. That's not descriptive. That doesn't tell my users what is in this file. So always check manually what your document title is called. This Grackle Sheets report is just checking to see that something is in there. It can't evaluate what is in there. So I'm going to now name this sales and contact information. So now I can feel pretty confident that this is an accessible sheet. But remember, we added those table names to all of our tables so that they're unique. We didn't do that for our contact info. So Alabama through Louisiana, this is where I ran into an issue. Table name was invalid, and that's because it has that hyphen. That could be interpreted by Google Sheets as a minus, which would not work well with formulas. So I have to think about how to name that. So Alabama through Louisiana, and then I'll repeat that for this table name as well, Maine through Wyoming. So Grackle Sheets doesn't check that, but you can go through and make sure, do all my tables have a name? Do all my sheets have a name? Does my file have a name? You have to make sure everything has a name because that is what allows us to fix it. And then sometimes Grackle Sheets does make issues. On this one, I added alternative text to the chart, but for whatever reason, I could not get the check to fix, to go to the green pass check mark. So if you have things on there and you have verified that they are accurate, it doesn't necessarily matter that there's still an X on the Grackle Sheets because it could just be an internal quirk that's going on. And that brings us to kind of our final point is you need to think about compliance beyond Grackle Sheets. So accessibility checkers are fantastic because they provide a really good starting point to take to ensure that your content is accessible, but they do require a little bit more human intervention. Some of the things to pay attention to are these three areas. Links. We had a link in our spreadsheet that said click here. That is not an accessible link. You need to make them descriptive. So anytime you have a link in your spreadsheet or your sheets, your Google Sheets, any of your content, make sure it's descriptive. So instead of pasting the URL, make it a descriptive hyperlink. And that goes back to making sure everything has a name. So click here is not descriptive. Give it the name of the link that's going to be very clear for users to understand. Grackle Sheets also can't check the language. Are you using clear, simple language? Are you using lots of jargon or acronyms? Make sure you check it for readability and keep it simple, and that will just make it easier for everyone to use and understand your content. The final thing that Grackle Docs does not check is, does your content have a logical reading order? This is one thing you can do. You can use the tab key. Just open your sheet and hit tab. Can you access all the information in that sheet using the keyboard? And is it being accessed in an order that makes sense? If it's not, maybe we need to reorder the content a little bit. So those are some things you can always pay attention to no matter what you're working on. If you're working on a spreadsheet, a presentation, a document, anything like that, always kind of pay attention to these three things because these are the three things that those automatic checkers don't always catch. Another thing to keep in mind, remember the tool versus the user. Automated checkers remove many of the barriers, but they cannot and will not ever replicate the user experience. So proactively seek feedback. Don't wait for your users to say, this doesn't work for me, because like we said at the beginning, that's the accommodation model. And we want to move forward to an anticipation model where we want to anticipate and remove those barriers. So actively seek feedback before you work with people. Engage users who use assistive technology and ask, is the flow of the information logical? Or ask, was it easy to navigate from sheet to sheet? And the larger your project, the more you're going to want to seek this feedback proactively. If you're just working with one or two colleagues, you can ask those questions internally. But again, if you're working on something that's going to go public, you really want to try to get that feedback ahead of time. And then also consider the cognitive load. Even if a sheet is technically accessible, if it's disorganized or overwhelming, the content can still be difficult to process for users with cognitive disabilities. It could also just be harder to access on different screen sizes or with different technology as well. So always prioritize clarity and simplicity when you're talking about your data. And with that, I do have time at the end for questions. So thanks for staying with me so far. And Sierra, are there any questions that we need to go back and review?
Hi everyone, Carolyn. Yes, we did have about 5 questions.
Perfect.
I'll kind of run through them just chronologically to kind of orient your brain for the presentation.
Perfect.
Tracy, she's our first up. She asked if this work making accessible documents is required for all sheets, including ones only used by employees.
Yes, it is. And that is the key difference between the updated guidance. You are required to make all of this content accessible, whether it's being used by employees or whether it's being used by the public. And the reason for that is you could have employees that require accessible content. And getting in the habit of making all of your content accessible, regardless of who is going to use it, will also make it easier for when you have those larger public audience projects. It's just a good habit to get in the habit of, and it also, maybe you don't have an employee on your staff that requires accessible content today, you might in the future. And so getting in the habit now, anytime you're making this content, is just going to make it part of your workflow. It's going to make it automatic, and it's going to end up making your projects easier to get compliant later on.
Awesome. Thanks, Carolyn. Another question from Annette. Will you be sharing this slide deck after the presentation?
Yes, I am.
Okay, perfect. Also from Annette, do we know if the Boise State brand standard colors have been checked for our color contrast ratios?
Yes, they have. All that information is available on the Brand Standards website. We did that as part of our web initiative back in 2017. Our orange was not compliant. And so if you go to the Brand Standards site, you will see that we have a orange and a print orange. If you are creating digital content, you use our digital orange. If you are publishing content on boisestate.edu, that is the orange that is being used. There are a couple other colors in our palette that are labeled as print only. Those are ones that are not accessible to use in a digital format. So take a look at brand standards for those compliance or those color ratios.
Awesome, great clarification there. Tracy has another one for us in our chart section of the training. Does it
Yes.
matter where and how the legend appears in charts?
I don't think so. For charts, probably go with conventions, and most charts have the legend on the, I believe, on the right-hand side, just to help with readability. So I would go with, what is conventions for that particular chart type. It may vary differently if you are using a pie chart or a bar chart. It just depends. The main thing is the legend there? That's more important than where it is on the chart.
Okay, fantastic. All right, last question from Tracy as well in the table section. How
Yes.
long is too long?
That is a great question, Tracy. And I tried to find the answer, and it didn't seem like there was a consistent this many rows, this many columns. It was difficult to tell where Grackle Sheets flagged something for too long. The table I had, I finally got it to flag it as too long once I hit about 1,000 rows. But ultimately use your best judgment. What is going to work for your data? What is going to work for your audience? If it has a logical break and you can break it up into smaller quantity or smaller tables, go for it. Some data just has to be in a larger format for the specific project or the specific topic that you're covering. So really use your best judgment. If there is a logical way to break them up, that will be helpful. But that check in particular, I believe, is a pass with warning, meaning it requires human review. So use your best judgment. It's that one I had a really difficult time finding a hard and fast rule on.
Thanks, Carolyn. We have one more from Danielle.
Yes.
She's put it in the chart. Our website brand standards are very challenging visually, where our font is incredibly large. Has this been or will be reviewed? I realize this is a more WordPress, but we have a lot of these forms published there, and it makes it difficult to get the quote big picture with limited space on a single screen.
So I don't have a specific answer for that one yet. You're talking about like our heading size, I believe, and I don't think there has been any discussion on changing that at the moment. But if you wanted to follow up with me separately, we could take a look at your project and see, is there something that we could do to maybe adjust the way it's presented on the page, or maybe change using one of our different block themes, or block styling that we have available to meet your needs. Because I know we've got some constraints in our web designs, but we may be able to adjust it a little bit based on your specific project. So if you want to follow up with me specifically, we can chat about that.
That is all of our questions, Carolyn.
Wonderful. Thank you guys all for joining me.